Testing. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the sixth of our webinars around fusion learning and the different pearls of wisdom and the different deadly sins of training. So, met me before. My name is Sharon Young. I am the founder of Pearlcatchers and of the concept of fusion learning. Background in both operational management, change management, and training, both within organisations in the public and private sectors. Today, in our sixth of these webinars in our series of 7, we'll be first of all talking about the first deadly sin that we're going to look at today, deadly sin number 7. So this is that perception that learning is all HR's responsibility. It's nothing to do with individual learners, nothing to do with the line managers, nothing to do with senior management. It's all down to HR. Looking at the equivalent pearl of wisdom, which is pearl of wisdom number 6, which is learning is actually everyone's responsibility in the organisation. So the purpose of today's webinar then is to discuss the issues of when learning is considered to only be HR's responsibility. And we'll introduce you to some tips for encouraging employees, line managers, and others to take more responsibility for their areas. If it is learning is HR's responsibility, what does that mean to you? What's your experience of that in organisations? If I can ask you to jot down on the chat mode, what experience have you got within organisations when they think that learning is just down to HR, not to anyone else? So I can just get you to jot down your thoughts on that, and I'll read that back out to everybody. Just use the chat button that you've got on your screen there. So, HR decides who does it. There's no consideration of the learner, no consultation with the line managers. Yeah. From Gary, you end up just getting a box that's ticked so that the manager can then get people involved in proper work. I like that, because training's not proper work at all, is it? And from Chaz, we better some training just in case. So not necessarily because someone leads it, but all got a list of things to do, so we all do things. Absolutely, yes, from Alicia, it becomes a formality. So if we make sure that the response is put on HR, then really it doesn't be learning. Actually, is much more like training. These are some of the sort of the problems that we've identified within this. Interesting as we go through for you to think, which of these do you experience in your organisations or organisations you work with and for? So the first thing for me is around the line managers, and a line share of this is around line managers for me. They take the responsibility for the development of employees, or sometimes allow them time to learn. So they might not want to release them for courses or give them time to do the sort of follow-up work that comes after a course. That might possibly because they don't consider it part of their role. Maybe it's not in their job description anywhere to look at that. Or often they haven't got the time to invest. Their emphasis is on the performance and making sure people are doing what they're meant to be doing and meeting their targets. And what is that they don't understand that to really get people to be able to learn and improve isn't going to get them to be better at their job. And as themselves, if we say that the responsibility is on HR, then the individual employees know about their learning development unless they're very ambitious. So their focus is on meeting the targets. And sometimes I see learning as a distraction. How many times have been running a training course when someone's been like, well, I've got to go back and do this, and I've got this piece of work and that piece of work. They see learning as sufficiently important for them to focus their attention on. Level, the organisation and managers generally don't value learning development, whether as a department within HR or an activity. They don't see the value that it gives to the organisation overall and to achieve in the organisational aim. which probably comes as a result of these attitudes from other people, is that people within HR think that all learning has to be controlled by them. They'd be in charge of all learning activities, otherwise it's not learning. The reality is, as we've mentioned in earlier sessions that Pat's run, is that probably about 10 to 20% of learning happens in the classroom. So if you're trying to control it in all a HR position, you never achieve that. For me now is to see which of those ones do you think you've experienced and that you see have most impact, negative impact on the ability of an organisation to be learning as individuals and as an organisation. And if you can just jot down your ideas in the chat section there. And so which of you experienced, what do you think their impact on the organisation's success and the success of learning? For Mark, yes, the 20 one is one that marks in very much, and I think if we get that in a lot of organisations. Challenge is to get people to realise that the benefits of learning to help achieve your wider targets and objectives. And the people there. Harry, yeah, the idea it's not my role. That's production. So that's sort of idea of like, yeah, that's them. Got to do this. So not considering the wider needs from Patricia and Alicia. Yeah, it's kind of the managers not understanding the value of L&D. Chad has been amazingly very lucky, and he's not suffered from it a great deal, apart from in the States apparently, where that was a bit of an issue there. For the biggest issue she saw was presentation for young planners moving up the ladder. They were automatically sent on a presentation course, but anything into practice for sometimes months. So by the time that they came to need it, not everything that they'd learnt. So that's one of the things we talked about before about repetition and about practice. And that's certainly a key thing. And I've followed quite a discussions on LinkedIn, a very interesting one a few months ago, about why the people fit so much that they've learned on training courses. And there's probably over 500 responses that obviously kind of tapped the nerve with people. And I went through in a moment of madness and reviewed all of the responses, put them into a table. And pretty much 90% of the answers to me to one of two key things. One, either the learners not being engaged before any kind of training or learning event. So they didn't see it as relevant to them. They didn't have motivation. They didn't see how it would link back to what they were doing. It wasn't in context with their world. They had no sort of motivation there. And the other side was the follow-up. So, they went back to it being just an event, which, as we said, was one of our deadly sins, was that actually training isn't an event, but learning is a process. So the second thing was coming up was that the opportunity for people to practice back in place. There was no opportunity for them to try things out, maybe make some mistakes occasionally. There was no follow-up from the managers to find out what they'd done, no what we call performance support. And I just sort of noticed Chad's comment there about that Rito on speed. That's got an interesting thing about not focusing on the important things. From very broad in her books, The Transfer Training, there are several key things they put down as being obstacles to transfer. So these are things such as lack of motivation, lack of enforcement, interference from the work environment, a non-supportive culture, the being seen as impractical or irrelevant, lack of accountability. So all of these things really very much come down to the sort of things we've talked about here as it being HR's responsibility. And all of those ultimately come to deadly sins there of focusing on training as being an event and all kind of squeeze it all in, and also sort of no room therefore for sort of repetition or learning. So what I'm recommending to instead of this? So question number 6 is learning is everyone's responsibility. That's everyone at all levels in an organisation. Learners themselves, the employees themselves, line managers, the senior managers, HR. So what does that mean to you? If you were seeing an organisation where they truly believe that learning is everyone's responsibility, what sort of behaviours would you expect to see in that organisation. So if you could find a couple of ideas there about what you think you would see in an organisation that truly embraced our pearl number 6, that learning is everyone's responsibility. So ideas from you on the chat now as to what you think might be examples of that. From Chaz, individuals asking to attend relevant courses, so being told to be sent on, actually having that choice themselves. Everyone's collaborating, so yes, it's not just HR, we're working together. Lots of staff discussion, free conversation. It's not just training courses, it's about what you learn on the workplace as well. Mark, yes, specific time set aside for your own development. That's quite rare, I think, in organisations, sadly, but have some time where absolutely people can say, now is my time to think about my development. It might be a very specific, I've got a presentation to do next week, so I need to do some planning. It might be sort of wider, where do I want to develop? That ultimately that leads to happy staff. Individual activities from Chaz, managers encouraging personal development plans. So as opposed to, it's something we do at the appraisal, it's something that people feel are useful, and as Pat said, something that's valued and valuable conversations about learning. For Mary, it's the individuals taking an interest in what others have learned and its relevance to them. And for Melissa, yeah, it's the managers taking an interest in the development of their employees. Interestingly, the majority of your comments there have applied to things at the employee or learner level and at the manager level, and I think that is really important. And I mustn't forget also the more side of things as well, and the responsibility of the senior managers and the L&D departments to sort of deal with things as well. The first thing is that learning development is a partnership, not a department. It's an activity, it's something that's really crucial to the organisation moving forward. Everyone has a role to play in that. So that you need to make sure that learning development is seen as part of the manager's role. It is something that's in their job description, that they're accountable for in their objectives. And also that they are developed to do this. One thing I find really sad, and I've seen in so many organisations, that's promoted or put into a role and they have the title manager. And it's as if someone suddenly waves a magic wand and they are expected to automatically have this whole raft of new skills, including being able to develop people. It's a skill. Some people have more natural tendencies towards it, but there's things that you learn. So for me, making sure those managers are supported in being able to help their staff to learn. So the process overall for me needs to include line manager involvement both before and after a formal intervention. So you may have heard this described as performance support, and I'm going to talk shortly about the work of Dr. Vinkoff and his high impact learning. And performance support is a really key word that they use in that, in terms of how you support the transfer of training, learning, and ultimately into becoming part of someone's performance and part of what they're doing in their job. Learn own their own development and allocated time to learn and to share. So as individuals, they see the benefit of learning to them and to the organisation. And also we look at things from a senior point of view. Leaders in an organisation really get it right. They need to be role modelling that skill of being constant learners themselves, and they need to see the value and development to the organisation and to helping the organisation to achieve its ultimate aims. So, that says managers are the crucial thing. A couple of books here from Peter Stenger, who's the author, amongst other things, of The Dance of Change. And here is that for organisations to learn and change, people learn and change. And managers are really those people that are closest to individuals, that are going to support them in doing that. So, some of you have been managers and seen managers. So why do you think managers don't get involved in learning and development? What are the top 2 or 3 reasons? Again, if you can jot those down in your chat, what are the reasons that you think stop managers from getting involved in learning and development? Pat said, yeah, they haven't got training to do things themselves. They recognise maybe it's important, but no one knows how to do it, so I don't want to do it wrong. Knowledge around how to do things. And again, it's one of those things, I'm a manager, I can't make mistakes. I don't realise that they've got to constantly be learning too. As he was very lucky, so he was quite good. He had someone that always did. Patch is someone else's responsibility. Lack of confidence, they haven't been experienced in that sort of thing, not seen as their remit. The key is that we've sort of seen from, again, this transfer of training, which is from Mary Ward's work, is don't see a link to results. Would I bother to do this? Because it's not going to get me the results that I need to get as a manager. It's costly. Potentially need to pay from their budget, but also it's too costly in terms of the time someone is away from their job. Managers don't have any input or involvement into what are the courses that people go on, or they're not seen as they don't see themselves having a role in the actual process. They're not engaged directly from the HR department. Relevant. They don't have the time. We've talked about that. Their focus is all on results. And again, has come up from you guys, a lack of preparation, knowledge, or skill. They either don't know what's required, or about not know how to do it. Darius said here, they're frightened because they think there's always a right or wrong way to do something. So, if I do development wrong, is it going to have worse impact than not doing anything? The reality from figures are that actually 80% of people's learning takes place not in the classroom, but in the workplace itself. So if the managers are not involved in learning, they don't see it as part of their role, we're losing out on a huge potential for learning. And the biggest failure in transfer is that lack of practice and application in the workplace. So certainly the role of the manager is really important. Good managers get involved. An image here that sort of looks at some of those things that sort of affect the impact of training. So factors that sort of concern things before the training, things like getting clarity of your purpose, your goal, preparation, thinking about people's needs, their motivation. That can be more than 40% of the leading comes from that. Actually happens on the day is going to be instruction, the preparation, the handouts, and sizes and cases. About the trainers, actually, although this is where we tend to focus most of our attention, it's 20% of the total impact at the moment. It's what happens after the training. So practice, feedback, support, giving people some cheers and some feedback, having the opportunity to use it, that's more than 40% of the impact of the training. Now, organisations, it's only an aspect that is managed. Managed by HR or a training provider. In addition, the aspect that is before that and then after that is managed or not terribly well managed in terms of organisations. It's very much the HR department that is involved, and that's why we end up with them being responsible for the vast majority of any kind of training. Now, link with this to learner engagement. To the next slide, and we're going to talk about a model that Mary Ward has come up with, which is called the transfer matrix. On this, we can really look at the stakeholders that are involved in the program. So the facilitators or trainers, if you want to use that, we're trying to get rid of, but a lot of people still use it. The learners, the people themselves, and the line managers. And together a program. This is a really useful tool to start looking and saying, okay, so before, during, and after the training, what are the responsibilities and actions we need from each of these people to really help that learning to be embedded? For example, if I can maybe get you to join in on the chat there again, what might be an example of, for someone, one for each? So what could be something that, say, facilitators could do before to help them to learn and to embed the learning? What could be something that learners could do during the actual event to embed that learning? And what's something that line managers could do afterwards? So I'm going to get some suggestions from you of one thing for each of those. So one thing facilitators that before the learning, one thing learners can do during the training event, and one thing line managers can do afterwards. They can ask what are their personal goals for the learning event, so the facilitators can get that information in advance. Yeah, they can send out some pre-work from people and some pre-reading to get people involved. What the learner's role is, so not what the job description is. So you have to get some understanding of what are their challenges, what are they doing. The learners can absolutely complete some pre-work. Always one of the challenges that we find is actually trying to get them to complete the pre-work, but get them involved in that. Yeah. What other things do you think learners can do during the process? Learners can stay engaged in things. Any ideas on that one? I manage about asking them to give an overview of what they want. Yeah, actually it's a good one, Chaz, for the learners. Make notes to give to other people. One of the important things in getting a true learning culture is that people age. So someone goes to a course and actually makes a notes, tell the rest of their team what they did. So making notes about that to keep them interested. So they give what they've covered. Line managers to expectations are from people. Think of real life examples where they could apply what they're learning. So yes, from the learners, absolutely. And perhaps saying here that she used to do that, making notes of things and feeding it on to her colleagues. I think the thing for the line managers particularly is that going back and finding out from them what were the actions they agreed at the end of the session. What are the things that they need to have together to talk about the learning as an individual or the team potentially. Really useful tool, I think, for you when you're thinking about putting in place any learning interventions. You think about the role at all of those levels. The thing that for me is fairly crucial in this, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because we have covered already. You may remember in the first seminar, I think it was, we talked about starting with the end in mind. We talked about the New World Kirkpatrick model. So historically, Kirkpatrick and the 4 levels were used very much purely for evaluation. But I do want to try and increase the value of learning development, which ultimately is going to be what's going to sort of get people at line manager level to see that it's important. We need people in HR to be speaking the language of the senior leadership team. They need to be linking what they're doing to the organisational benefits. And we talked again in that first session very much about setting the right objectives and the outcomes that are going to mean something. So if you weren't involved, you can certainly sort of log on and get details of the blog did and the webinar that we did around this in a lot more detail. Or also, if you want to log on to our website, one of our purpose papers was on the topic of how you can prove the worth of L&D through good evaluation. And it looks very much at this model. As you work from level 4 backwards. So focus on what are the outcomes of the organisations, what are the leading indicators that you need to enable you to get the results that you want. From that, what are the behaviours and skills that you need people to have? And then moving back to level 2, what's the knowledge, the attitude, how do you give them that confidence and commitment to use those new skills and knowledge? And from that, how do you make sure people are engaged at the outset? So I'll go over that in detail because we have covered that already, but I think it's really important to sort of consider we get that value for learning development. What I do want to put up is an image that is a summary of some of the work of Dr. Robert Brinkhoff. His book, Impact Learning, for me, was absolutely crucial in sort of my views of where we go in terms of fusion learning. And it's one of the few pieces of theory and research that for me covers the whole process from before the intervention to after the intervention. And again, obviously you get a copy of these slides for afterwards, but I think if you look over the right-hand side, it very much links to some of those things that we're talking about, and the idea that traditionally managers think that L&D is something that's could I, sorry, Brian, could I just ask you to mute because we just can hear your conversation background there? That would be great. Thank you. So L&D being viewed by managers is something that L&D does to participants. People don't see involvement in that. Whereas high learning, managers are much more aware of the influence they have on the success of things. It's very much in terms of previous, maybe knew someone was going to a training course. Naturally, they take a bit of action and they talk about something called impact maps, learning impact maps. It's a bit of a mouthful there. And the idea of that is that before an organisation, before someone goes on to training, they sit down with them and they think about what are the objectives that this course is meant to have. Why do I feel we need to go on it? What are my specific objectives? How's that going to benefit the business? And then they go back with the individual conversation, what learned, which of these do you think you're going to be able to deliver moving forward? What support do you need? So you see there's a lot of similarities with a lot of language that we've been using in Fusion Learning here. And it's something that for me is really crucial. It's the role of languages on the one side, and on the other side it's very much about the role of MD. We'll be talking about this in some of our future papers that we'll be publishing in the new year. We're doing one of the learning facilitator and their role and the new skills that they need to survive in this new world. We'll also be pushing a paper on embedding learning, which will look at a lot of these techniques and all the transfer of training techniques as well. And finally, we'll be looking at some of the informal learning and how you can, as a manager, make the most of everything that exists out there. So having a look at this model that we have here, on how you adopted that kind of approach in an organisation, what benefits do you think that would have to the organisation and to the learners? Again, in your chat boxes with me there, any thoughts you've got on if the approach was adopted in your organisation or organisation you work with, what would be the impacts and benefits on the organisation overall? The individuals would feel greater input and control over their development. From joined up development, so it's targeted specifically at organisation development. So it's what's going to really benefit to it, as opposed to, I think Gary won about those ticking of the boxes. Something we've got an organisation benefit, we've got an individual benefit, pulling in the same direction. Absolutely. Sure, absolutely. We think about learning as part of an organisation and where we're going. And in this day and age, to be successful, organisations need to learn, improve and change as an organisation. And the only way they're going to be able to really do that if all the individuals within that organisation are fully able to learn, improve and change along with those things. And that's all say, and certainly the powers which we've covered so far will be helpful in doing that and be helpful, as Gary said, in getting much more cost effective, much ownership of things. What we really need to manage to do to enable us to truly make that difference and to make it become the way that people do things is we need to create a truly agile learning culture. We need a culture of the organisation so that people see that learning is a core part of what they do all day. Topic of our final blog, which has come out today, actually, and the webinar which is going to be next week. So if you haven't read the blog already, have a little look at that, and we'll be introducing you to something called the Culture Web, which is one of my favourite models by a guy called Gary Johnson. It's a very, very practical way of getting to both assess your current culture and to design your desired culture. So what we'll be doing next week is I will introduce you to the model and get you to start thinking about what are some of the things that we need to have in an organisation. What are some of the representations of a culture that shows that you've got a truly agile learning culture in an organisation. And maybe look at some of the things that might hold us back, or some of the changes that we need to make. So that's of today's blog and of next week's webinar. But whilst we're here, as this is the time to close today, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to see if anyone's got any questions or queries. We've covered quite a lot today. So any particular questions or queries on anything that we've covered at all today? If you don't have any questions or queries, what might I supposed to be interested today? Maybe with the rest of the group, one take from the conversation that we've had today. What's one thing that you're going to take, maybe as a trainer or as a manager? What's one action or piece of information that you're going to take today to make learning and development everyone's responsibility as opposed to just the HR department. If you share one little thing, that will be absolutely brilliant. The importance of the senior management, so needing to get senior managers involved and speaking their language. He's been a very, very lucky boy because he's never had any major problems with that. So that's good. For Brian, it's to kind of improve that reporting feedback, going back to people after you've had sort of learning interventions, whether that's for a meeting or training course, letting people learn from that. She can provide greater value for everyone by some of those extra elements by getting more involvement from the managers. With all of these things, we will be sending you a link to this if you want to view it or to send it to anyone afterwards. And if you've got any questions, then please do contact us through the website. And I look forward to catching up with you very, very soon. Thank you, and I hope you have a good afternoon.